Now,
Recording in progress.
Welcome everybody to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher, and today we're joined by a couple of co-hosts in this exegetical reading session of Matt Taibbi's Hate, Inc., which is a book that came out a few years ago that a lot of people missed the memo on, but is not going to become any less relevant anytime soon. It is really important. It is, in a sense, the continuation of the Chomskyan project of manufacturing consent that says the game has fundamentally changed from what it was in the previous century, meaning that we have moved from this model of a mass society into a society that is duopolistic in nature inherently. And so on the front cover, if you're listening to this and don't have eyes on screen, it shows Hannity on the red side and Rachel Maddow on the right, the blue side. And the comparison pisses some people off because one side doesn't hate marginalized people, whereas the other side supposedly does. Obviously, there's reprehensible pieces of shit and just noxious ideology on the right, but there's also noxious ideology on the left. And one of the worst forms of it is the scapegoating of regular working people who are structurally stultified and functionally illiterate, and the reduction of them or of regular working people to the side of the system that is willing to speak to them. The reduction to a platform, the reduction to a party, the reduction to some principles. And our approach is always, okay, there are values that have been captured or monopolized by each side. And there are just certain tendencies that are not necessarily bad or evil, or at least forever lost, represented on both sides. But more importantly, the two sides get us off on the wrong foot because those two sides are not representative of most working people in the first place. Actually, most working people do not feel represented by either side and see no real way forward through third parties because of the actual way that the two-party system has captured and monopolized its duopolistic position. And so Nance and I did a reading while Ann was sleeping in the back of a car of Baudrillard's duopoly section from Symbolic Exchange and Death, which is now available at the Theory Underground YouTube app, or sorry, YouTube, whatever, Theory Underground YouTube. But anyway, Nance, Ann are the co-hosts. Austin is the objectified or personified manifestation of our actual audience, which is based and international. So welcome. It's great to have you, man. This will be Ann's first exegetical reading with us. The general rule is that we talk for 30% of the time, or I guess we say what, 27% of the time, and 73% of the time. Is that right? Yeah, I can't math this. We spend that rest of the time reading, because the author should be able to speak on their own.
Yeah.
So, but with that said, I've already talked too much. So I want you both to say a couple words. We'll start with Nance because Ann's going to actually situate this text a little bit more than I just did. I gave very broad strokes. She's going to talk about what happened in chapter 1 before this chapter. But Nance, yeah, do you want to say anything before we hop in?
yeah, I think this book and Matt Taibbi's work in general is super important. It's super pertinent. It's super timely. And it seems to be only getting more relevant. Like he has produced a body of work that's critical of Democrats and liberals and the left or whatever. And he's just getting more and more relevant. And he's actually like, now he is like a persecuted person. Like he's like on the run from legal consequences from him. Or maybe not on the run, but he's facing like some bullshit. Because he's just trying to do the thing that the media and journalists have ostensibly been doing all along. So yeah, Matt Taibbi's the shit. It's a great book. I'm happy that we're doing it.
Yeah. So this book kind of comes out of the 2016 election, which I think was a total like wrench in the system in terms of how we thought elections were supposed to go. You pick the candidate who's most likable, who looks best on TV, who, you know, you can have a beer with. And then Trump kind of came in and he was loud and obnoxious and not the most like attractive, conventionally attractive president we've ever had. He was saying things that were offensive. He had no filter. And the liberal media acted all, oh my gosh, how could this have happened? But at the same time, like most of their coverage of the 2016 election on CNN and MSNBC and those platforms was just about Trump. And so there was this like very present breakdown of the media that we saw in 2016. And so Taibbi, he kind of takes that and runs with it and expands on the Chomsky project. So the first chapter that I was reviewing this morning is called The Beauty Contest, press coverage of the 2016 election. And he talks about kind of exactly what I just said, that contradiction of how we thought elections were supposed to be run and what happened in 2016. And then the rest of the book explores just more generally what's going on in the media and the media's role in politics and kind of how it's changed since Chomsky's time, and why it's dividing the country, why we could blame the media for the rise of Trump or for this hate and this divide. And so the chapter that we're going to read today is chapter 2. It's called The 10 Rules of Hate, probably kind of comparable to Chomsky's like 6 frames, or what are they? The filters of media. So
the propaganda model.
The propaganda models. Yeah. So now we've got these 10 rules of hate that we're going to go through, and that's going to be our reading for the CMT cohort. But honestly, the whole book is not only is it accessible, like it's not the most difficult text, but it's really funny because you can feel his like seething hatred for the media and his own role. He reflects on his own role. He's like, yeah, and I foolishly played along, you know, even like back into during the 2016 election. So it's a truly an enjoyable read, and it's eye-opening. And so I recommend the whole book. It's not that hard of a read. It's not that long.
Yeah, get it on Audible or whatever. So we'll just take turns reading. It'll go Ann, Nance, Dave, Ann, Nance, Dave, Ann, Nance, Dave, and we'll try to maintain that 73-27 rule.
Cool.
And
maybe with this one, since it's broken up into like 10 rules, we can just each, like I can read the first part up until the first rule, and then we just take turns on all the rules.
Love that.
Cool. I guess I'm going to start. Is it okay if I read on my reader and
yeah,
follow along? Okay.
Nance can scroll it and everyone can see that way.
Cool. All right, let's do it. The 10 Rules of Hate. Pick up any major newspaper or turn on any network television news broadcast. The political orientation won't matter. It could be Fox or MSNBC, the Washington Post, or the Washington Times. You'll find virtually every story checks certain boxes. Call them the 10 Rules of Hate. After generations of doing the opposite, when unity and conformity were more profitable, now the primary product the news media sells is division. We also sell content that's just plain stupid, what that TV producer friend of mine calls the "isn't this weird" effect. But the easiest media product to make is called "the bad thing that just happened is someone else's fault." It has a virtually limitless market. I know this because I've created a lot of that content. Over the years, I became increasingly uneasy about feeding readers hate reflexes. I tried to get around this by only picking stories about things that were genuinely outrageous, but eventually you start to feel the tail wagging the dog. In recent years, I started to hear from other reporters who'd begun doing the same thing. You'll hear from some of them below. The problem we all have is the commercial structure of the business. To make money, we've had to train audiences to consume news in a certain way. And see, this is like the ways in which neoliberalization kind of manifests in all spheres of public life in the United States of America, because everything gets turned into a business model. So rather than the news being about informing citizens, it's about making the most money. And so they're always going to be the viewers, the consumers of the news are always going to be seen as just that, as consumers, as customers. We need to please them to get the most of their money. And so that's kind of, I think, contextualizes what he's talking about. But he talked about also in the first chapter, just like the media's main goal now is making money. Like, even though they were like, oh, we can't believe we're talking about Trump again. Really, like the Trump talk's bringing in the dough. I tried to get around this. Oh, I think I read that one. The problem we all have is the commercial structure of the business. To make money, we've had to train audiences to consume news in a certain way. We need you anxious, pre-pissed, addicted to conflict. Moreover, we need you to bring a series of assumptions every time you open a paper or turn on your phone, TV, or car radio. Without them, most of what we produce will seem illogical and offensive. The trick is to constantly narrow your mental horizons and keep you geeked up on impotent anger. It's a twist on manufacturing consent's description of an artificially narrowed debate.
I just want to say, like, the keeping people geeked up, pre-pissed, and on a bunch of assumptions, that if you don't actually have those assumptions, then none of it actually makes sense and just comes off as offensive, is crucial, because most people don't consume the news in workplaces that I've worked at. Most working people are not consuming the news. There's usually a couple people who are pre-pissed. They're kind of just always pissed. One of my favorite people from my college days was an administrative assistant at the philosophy department. And during the Trump years, her thing was like drawing devil horns on Trump and Trump people, like on the newspaper, and writing pithy little things in the margins and kind of scratching out their eyes. And it was crazy, because it's just like she'd be like, you see what I'm doing? But she was always like low-key pissed. And obviously a person whose main thing that they're following when they scroll is, say, Black Lives Matter footage, yeah, you're gonna be pissed. You're constantly watching cops fucking with people, usually black people. And so it's like that, but it's just like you're on this drip, this sort of like, he has a different chapter in this book called Why Consuming the News is a Lot Like Smoking Cigarettes or something like that.
Yeah.
But okay.
The Herman Chomsky thesis in the mid-1980s highlighted how the press manufactured public unity by making sure the population was only exposed to a narrow range of political ideas, stretching from Republican to Democrat, with the Democrat usually more like an Eisenhower Republican. So long as you stayed on that little median strip, you accepted a broad range of underlying principles that never popped up in the sanitized, Nerf ball version of debate that op-ed pages exhibited. The difference now: we encourage full-fledged division on that strip. We've discovered we can sell hate, and the more vituperative the rhetoric, the better. This also serves larger political purposes. So long as the public is busy hating each other and not aiming its ire at the more complex financial and political processes going on off camera, there is very little danger of anything like a popular uprising. That's not why we do what we do, but it is why we're allowed to operate this way. It boggles my mind that people think they're practicing real political advocacy by watching major corporate TV, be it Fox or MSNBC or CNN. Does anyone seriously believe that powerful people would allow truly dangerous ideas to be broadcast on TV? The news today is a reality show where you're part of the cast, America versus America, on every channel. The trick here is getting audiences to think they're punching up when they're actually punching sideways at other media consumers just like themselves, who just happen to be in a different silo. Hate is a great building mechanism.
Blinding.
Oh, great blinding mechanism. Thank you. Once you've been in the business long enough, you become immersed in its nuances. If you can get people to accept a sequence of simple, powerful ideas, they're yours forever. The 10 rules of hate.
1. There are only two ideas. There are only two baskets of allowable opinion, Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, left or right. This is drilled into us at a young age. By the time we hit college, most of us, roughly speaking, will have chosen the political identity we'll stick with for the rest of our lives. It's the Boolean version of politics, pure binary thought, blue or red, true or false. 041. Open up a New York Times op-ed page if you want to see the contours. The spectrum of ideas is narrow. There is no Paul Goodman preaching revolutionary pacifism. There's no Thoreau denouncing the spiritual bankruptcy of our work-centric lives, urging us to reconnect with nature. There are no Twains telling us that to lodge all power in one party and keep it there is to ensure bad government. There are no Bierces or Swifts helping us laugh at the rich and powerful and pompous. There is, however, always a Bret Stephens or a Ross Douthat representing the red side, along with the standard lineup of Paul Krugman's and Nick Kristoff's repping the blue side. The Washington Post has George Will and Max Boot. Intellectual diversity in a major news outlet means someone from both parties. You will connect with one or the other. It doesn't matter which one.
The two ideas are in permanent conflict. It was a joke in the 70s with Saturday Night Live's Point Counterpoint. The Saturday Night Live news show pitted Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin against each other, viciously railing over issues no sane person could possibly care about. "Jane, you ignorant slut," seethed Aykroyd in a debate about actor Lee Marvin's palimony case. The skit was hilarious precisely because normal human beings don't dress up in suits and ties to yell insults at each other over issues that have nothing to do with their actual lives. This joke became a formal part of the news landscape not long after. It began with shows like the McLaughlin Group on PBS, then continued more famously with Crossfire on CNN. That's where Tucker comes from, I think. Crossfire solidified the idea that politics is a fight and that Democrats and Republicans not only must never come to an agreement about things, but must debate to the end in a sports-like forum.
And then we see how this manifests like in our own government, in like the Senate and the House, when there's like literally nothing gets done half the time because it's just constant fighting. And then the Democrats will use this rhetoric, like they use rhetoric of fights and fighting, like we will continue to fight for the minimum wage. Meanwhile, this was said by Nancy Pelosi when Democrats had the presidency, control the Senate, and control the House. Like, who are you fighting? Like, the fight's all a facade, but we see the way not only it happens in the media, but then like literally the government buys into it too, that we have to fight each other.
Yeah, it's kind of like
and not like do their job.
like Roe v. Wade. Like they had their opportunity for a long time to actually like make that something that couldn't be gone back on. They didn't. And now they're like, we gotta fight. And it's like all of the, like, I there was a while where I was still getting those funding emails. It's like, oh my God, we need your money because this fight goes on. It's like, yeah, of course this fight goes on. It's like fighting cigarette addiction goes on and you're still making money, right? Like, yeah.
Anyways.
Crossfire solidified the idea that politics is a fight and that Democrats and Republicans not only must never come to an agreement about things, but must debate to the end in a sports-like forum. By the way, in terms of exegetical readings, I do believe in rereading the previous sentence and not, anyway. Some of the early Crossfire shows on CNN with Pat Buchanan from the right and Tom Braden from the left were confused duds in terms of format. There were actually episodes where the left and right positions were weirdly in agreement, almost as though human beings could share common sense reactions to certain things. Take, for instance, the show when both Braden and Buchanan blasted Pan Am Airlines for not warning passengers of terrorist threats before the Lockerbie disaster. But the show quickly settled on the never agree format that would make it a hit. Buchanan and Braden would duke it out to the end, often over cultural issues. An episode in which they debated the propriety of a Dan Rather interview with then Vice President George H.W. Bush shows Buchanan in a preview of early anti-press populism. A dynamic of the show perfectly predicted by manufactured consent was that the from the left actor usually spent most of the episode sniveling and begging for compromise, while the from the right actor was always attacking. This sent a message to audiences that lefties were, basically, weenies. Journalist Jeff Cohen who would end up cast in a later version of the show and who wrote a terrific book about the experience called Cable News Confidential, described it this way: the libs were like boxers who didn't know how to punch. Future debate shows like, and I would just say, like, I think he's going in this direction, is to say like that's obviously changed. It's like nowadays being a radical is having liberal sentiments but punching. It's like, ooh, you can say fuck you, right? Like you can say fuck you, you piece of shit, and that makes you not a lib because you're radical, because look at that, you just landed a punch. And it's just like, it's actually cringy how much they think they're being subversive when they say things that are just, yeah. At least it's not being the weenie, right? Future debate shows like Hannity and Combs, and one I've been on, Real Time with Bill Maher, also depended on the theater of conservatives endlessly battling with liberals, much in the same way that TV shows like MASH, which habituated viewers to the Orwellian idea that Americans were always at war, far away with some Asiatic enemy somewhere. This was why the director of the MASH movie, Robert Altman, hated the popular TV show. Crossfire trained us to see our world not just as a binary political landscape, but also as one permanently steeped in conflict. Cohen was cast as the liberal opposite, the likes of Buchanan and comedian Ben Stein. And Cohen writes humorously about the rattling discovery that Stein's nasal delivery turns out to be his actual voice. He was soon weighed down by the cross-sniping format that he set as his goal, trying to say something unconventional, to stretch the limits of debate at least once per episode. That stretching the limits of debate idea, stretching the Overton window, is still where BreadTube, LeftTube, etc. is at. Alternative media is still thinking its job is to stretch the limits of debate, when in reality, that idea of the limits of debate is this 1970s through 90s model that we have superseded already. Even that turned out to be extremely difficult. The shows are not designed to expand mental horizons. They're about two things: reinforcing the notion that the world is split in half, what Cohen calls the two and only two message, and the spectacle of combat. These TV debates, this is a big quote, these TV debates are not about ideas or solutions or ideology, but simply partisan sniping and talking point recitation, Cohen says now. I enjoy a game of right-wing philosophical debate when it's between serious analysts or journalists, as opposed to Democrat versus Republican BS artists and party hacks.
A genuine right-left debate.
He prefers a genuine right-left philosophical debate. Yeah. In his book, Cohen referenced an old joke. What do pro wrestling and the US Senate have in common? Both are dominated by overweight white guys pretending to hurt each other. He said, the intellectual level of cable news is one step above pro wrestling. Cohen wrote that over a decade ago. Today, the news is at the level of pro wrestling. This is one reason we have a WWE performer in the White House. It's the ultimate synthesis of politics and entertainment, and the core of it all is the ritual of conflict. Without conflict, there's no product. This would be a really good way to tie in opposition versus antagonism or contradiction, point being, working within a Žižekian framework, there are genuine contradictions that are constitutive of the society as it currently exists. And then there are superficial oppositions that get their sustenance from those actual contradictions, but necessarily keep people from getting to those contradictions merely at the level of aesthetic or tone or some forever debate like guns or abortion or something like that. Once you accept the two and only two idea, we basically have you. The only trick from there is preventing narrative upsetting ideas from getting on screen too often. Hence,
Hate people, not institutions.
quick check. Is Ann speaking when the microphone's over here just as audible as when I hold it closer to her?
It sounds pretty good.
Okay.
Trump is not just the perfect media product, he's a brilliant propaganda mechanism. systemic, most of our public debates are referendums on personality. Not many people can be neutral on the subject of Trump, so we wave him at you all day long. Meanwhile, a vast universe of systemic issues is ignored. We've been steadily narrowing that field of view for decades, particularly in investigative reporting. In the late 90s, there was a series of high-level efforts by journalists to take on major corporate interests. One of them, the 60 Minutes download of Big Tobacco whistleblower Jeffrey Wiggin, was made into a feature film called The Insider, starring Al Pacino and Russell Crowe. A second involved the Cincinnati Enquirer, which did a sweeping investigation of anti-labor practices at the Chiquita Banana Company, which included paying millions to designated terrorist organizations and death squads like Colombia and other countries. A third effort involved Mary TV reporters Steve Wilson, Jane Baker at WTTV in Tampa, a Fox affiliate. They prepared a huge expose on Monsanto and its use of bovine growth hormone. All three big swinging exposés ended in actual or threatened litigation and disaster. 60 Minutes famously screwed over their source. Wiggin and out year of being sued by tobacco firm Brown and Williamson, a moment that was an outflow for press credibility. From that moment, sources could never be sure if they were making a deal with reporters or reporters' lawyers. The Chiquita reporters were denounced using a voicemail code given to them by a source to access Chiquita communications. This is an offense that seems pale in comparison to helping death squads intimidate workers, but it won the headlines in the end. The paper ended up paying $10 million to Chiquita. In manufacturing consent, Chomsky and Herman noted that in the aftermath of our loss in Vietnam, we regularly debated morality of war journalism, but we rarely discussed the apparently less important subjects like invasion, occupation, bombing civilians, and so on. We still regularly examine the behaviors of investigative journalists as a source of potential overreach. It's the same species of overhyped controversy as tort reform. Chiquita was a story about the very worst kind of corporate misbehavior, but in the cultural memory, it's been a story about dicey journalism. In a headline years later, the New Yorker describes the story as the Chiquita phone hacking scandal, as opposed to, say, the Chiquita buys AK-47s for death squad scandal. Baker and Wilson were bluntly told by their new masters at Fox, "We paid $3 billion for this station. We'll decide what the news is," and were then fired. After losing wrongful termination and whistleblower suits when they protested being let go for doing their jobs, Baker and Wilson were countersued for damages. "We ended up paying them for the privilege of having our story killed," recalls a seething Aker. In the years after manufacturing consent came out, big corporate conglomerates bought up most major media outlets. Station directors and publishers without reporting backgrounds suddenly became common. Now, when you went to your boss to press for an important story, you were often talking to someone who looked back at you the way an auto executive might at an engineer pushing production of a car with a super cool optional exploding tire feature, as in, why the hell would we try to get sued? The biggest outlets learned there's no percentage in doing big exposés against large, litigious companies. Not only will they sue, but they're also certain to pull ads as punishment. This was a big consideration in the Monsanto case, as Fox had 22 stations that could all have used NutraSweet ads. Why make trouble? I think this was one of the filters in manufacturing consent, is making, if it wasn't one of the filters, it was one of Chomsky's points in like the beginning, is that you want to make your content ad friendly because there's so many commercials now, and like with the model and the medium of the TV, it's kind of structured to uplift the commercials, and so of course you don't want ads to get pulled because that's your funding. It's just a whole loop that revolves around commercialization and consumerism, and you're a customer, buy our news and buy our products. So yeah, why make trouble? News audiences had also been trained by then not to value this kind of work the way they once had. It was easy enough to sell something else instead. Better weather graphics, celebrity news, faster delivery, etc. Papers and stations that had their own correspondents abroad or in Washington increasingly shuttered those offices and relied on the wires. Nobody much cared. The message of reporters working in big corporate news organizations was that long-form investigative reports targeting big commercial interests weren't forbidden exactly, just not something your boss was likely to gush over. I don't know if it was my case or just common sense, but there are some things you just know, says Aker. Like if you want to work in TV in Florida, you're not going to do exposés on Disney. Consumer reporting, instead, increasingly focused on softer targets. What you get instead is an exposé about some little Vietnamese restaurant, because they won't fight back, obviously, says Aker. She drops her voice as she imitates a consumer reporter VO. You know, it's, we'll take you behind the restaurant door. Aker, who was asked by her boss if she was sure a Monsanto expose was the hill she wanted to die on, never worked in TV again. The reason these tales are important is that when media companies aren't doing the right stories, they start self-sorting for the wrong ones. You could call this the worthy and unworthy targets principle. Another filter or another concept from manufacturing consent. This worthy versus unworthy victims. Now it's worthy versus unworthy targets.
Yeah, I was just seeing a good example of that with a screenshot of CNN reporting on deaths in Israel versus Palestine. And on the one side it said like the number of what was it? It was like the difference between like murdered and killed. I think like the one side they were murdered, the other side they were killed, and you could see it on the screen. Like, yeah, the Israelis were murdered, the Palestinians were killed. It's like
interesting.
It's like right there. It's like, you know, sometimes they just put it right in front of you. It's crazy.
Yeah, this Israel-Palestine kind of conflict that is come back up very strongly will be a great like case study in Chomsky's project and then in this. And like everyone just feels the need to like say something about it. And it's like, I think we shouldn't as civilians. I don't think it's quite our place, but that's what the model has sold to us. Like your side, say what your side says. And there's no nuance really, seemingly. It's either like Palestine has the right to kill whoever they need to because it's decolonization, or it's like full support of Israel, full denunciation. There's like no nuance. Anyways. Worthy targets are small-time crooks, restaurant owners with rats, actors, athletes, reality stars, and other minor miscreants. In the 90s, to this list of worthy subjects, we added two more, either of the two approved political parties. Aker was present for the birth of this innovation. She worked at early Fox stations that had the look, but not yet the politics. Chandelier earrings, shoulder pads, giant blown-out hair, she laughs, describing the costume of female anchors at a Miami affiliate where she'd worked in the early 90s. They had the outrageousness, but not yet the slant. It was after the Monsanto episode that Fox struck gold with the Lewinsky story and the Clinton impeachment. Roger Ailes, the new CEO, who had helped kill the Monsanto piece, was learning to cash in by terrifying elderly audiences with images of evil hippie power couple Bill and Hillary Clinton. Dude, I wish they were a hippie power couple. Hillary denigrated baking cookies while letting her husband run around with his pants around his ankles, thanks in large part to Lewinsky and the Star Probe, stories that Fox rode to riches as white hat/black hat soap dramas. The network went from launch to top of the cable market in less than 6 years. Fox nailed the formula of the modern news story. Forget just doing a cable variety show with conservatives and liberals engaged in ritualized fighting. Why not make the whole news landscape a rooting section? It would be a while before other networks embraced Fox-style open political slant, and when they did it in a different way. But Ailes quickly had a lot of imitators when it came to the blame game, because
4. Everything is someone else's fault. Here's how we create political news content. Something happens. It doesn't matter what. Donald Trump nominates Brett Kavanaugh. A hurricane hits Puerto Rico. The financial markets collapse. Bill Clinton is impeached for perjury over a sex act. A massive humanitarian crisis hits Syria. Whatever it is, our task is to turn it into content, quickly running it through a flowchart. Bad thing happens. Can it be blamed on one or the other party? Yes, we do the story. No, we don't do the story. See Rule 5. The overwhelming majority of controversial news stories involve simple partisan narratives cleaved quickly into hot-button talking points. Go any deeper and you zoom off the flowchart. We like easy stories. This is another reason Trump has been such a savior to the news business, no matter how much Brian Stetler wants to deny it. Every narrative involving Trump is perfect, easy enough for the most uneducated audience to digest. It has to be, because Trump usually has to understand it, and prepackaged in crude binary format. Trump lied about 3,000 deaths in the Puerto Rico hurricane is a story you can put in almost any big city newspaper. If your audience is conservative, you can go with the flipped version about how the media is out to screw the Donald. No, it was Democrats who lied about the numbers. And what about Donald Trump's border policies separating families? Aren't they inhumane? Literally concentration camps? Concentration camps on our border? Yes, say some outlets, but Trump says it was Obama's policy. No way, says PolitiFact, a fact-checking site preferred by liberal audiences. Well, sort of, say Obama's former Homeland Security Chief Jay Johnson, who went on Fox and freely admitted the Obama administration did jail families and separate children in what he called a controversial policy. If you weren't watching Fox but MSNBC, which ran horrifying details of new DHS reports of just plain inhumane conduct, you'd be right back where you probably started if you belonged to their target demographic, outraged by a brutal Trump policy. In the days when we had a public interest standard that mandated companies using the public airwaves produce at least some non-sociopathic, non-commercial content, or when we had a fairness doctrine that required that reporters seek out credible representatives of different viewpoints, all of this back and forth would typically be weighed in one story. Part of the reporter's job was to put aside the fault question and just describe the factual picture. The thornier the issue, the harder that job was. Immigration is a classic example of a story where blame for widespread misery and suffering is almost always diffuse and systemic, and very difficult to lay on any one politician or party. Trump's zero-tolerance gambit stands out because part of the intent of the policy seems to have been to dial up the inhumane aspects of enforcement bureaucracy to send a message. Moreover, it comes from a president who's used lines like, "they're bringing rapists," to rally anti-immigrant sentiment for political reasons. But it is true that immigrant children were routinely separated from their parents long before Trump. Moreover, the entire enforcement system is, and long has been, draconian and inhumane in a way that would shock most non-immigrants. Also, it's not as if this problem was entirely created by American border officials. The numbers are lower today, but we've had years where nearly 70,000 unaccompanied children tried to cross the southern border. Is there a good way to handle that? Administrations of both parties have had differing levels of failure dealing with this, but it's almost never looked good. The best news stories take issues and find a way to make readers think hard about them, especially inviting them to consider how they themselves contribute to the problem. You want people thinking, "I voted for what?" Most problems are systemic, bipartisan, and bureaucratic, and most of us, by voting or not voting, paying taxes or not, own a little bit of most disasters. But we veer you away from that mental alley and instead feed you stories about how someone else did the bad thing because
I can read if you want. Oh, Dave's coming.
Yeah. I went to get deodorant, and then I was like, I should bring up some stuff because we just have piles of stuff that needs to come upstairs. So every time I come up, I bring a new box of books. This is the thing.
Good
I
job.
got awesome. Bye, guys.
All right, take care, Austin. Nothing is everyone's fault, which is rule number 5. If both parties have an equal or near equal hand in causing a social problem, we typically don't cover it. Or better to say, a reporter or two might cover it, but it's never picked up. It doesn't take over a news cycle, doesn't become a thing. The bloated military budget, mass surveillance, American support for dictatorial regimes like the cannibalistic Mibasago family in Equatorial Guinea, United Arab Emirates, or Saudi Arabia. Our culpability in proxy nation atrocities in places like Yemen or Palestine, the drone assassination program, rendition, torture, the drug war, absence of access to generic or re-imported drugs? Nah, we just don't do these stories. At least we don't do them anywhere near in proportion to their social impact. They're hard to sell, and the ability to market a story is everything. Nomi Prinz used to be a banker for Goldman Sachs. She left the industry prior to the 2008 crash and became an important resource for all Americans in the years that followed, helping explain what banks were doing and why from an inside perspective. In recent years, she became increasingly alarmed by central banking policies around the world. In Europe and the United States, she zeroed in on programs like quantitative easing that overworked the money-producing powers of the state and pumped giant sums of invented cash into the finance sector. She called this a massive, unprecedented, coordinated effort to provide liquidity to the banking systems on a grand scale. These policies are a kind of permanent welfare mechanism for the financial sector and have had a dramatic impact around the world. They've accelerated an already serious financial inequality problem and addicted the banking sector to an unsustainable subsidy. There's only one problem, at least in terms of editors. You can't sell this story as any one party's fault. It is a purely bipartisan situation that things are as fucked up as they are, laughs Prinz. The central banking policies have been supported by what we think of as the entire range of allowable political thought in America, as in from Bush-era Republicans who signed off on the original bank bailouts through the Obama Democrats who followed. Prinz's recent book on the topic, Collusion, describes a classic systemic problem, one that ought to have deep interest to both camps. For liberals, it's a story about an obscene subsidy of the very rich, while for conservatives, it's a profound story about the corruption of capitalism. Since when? I see, the corruption of capitalism, right? Because conservatives like to just call that crony capitalism. I was like, since when do conservatives want to talk about capitalism? No, okay, I get it. The corruption of capitalism, because capitalism is supposed to be good. But TV bookers have struggled to figure out how to market Prinz. She tells a story of a TV host who, in a troubled voice, quizzed her off air. He was like, I can't tell if you're progressive or conservative. And I thought, that's good, isn't it? In the Trump era, Prinz has faced an even steeper uphill climb. Not only did she write a book called Collusion that isn't about that collusion, she's writing about a topic that really has no direct Trump angle. Although her book does explicitly talk about how central banking problems contributed to political unrest that led to both Brexit and Trump, that topic is not a popular one on lefty media. Prinz figures that's because they're just racist, they're just deplorables. They don't want to hear anything that ever has to do with anything economic ever. Prinz figures she's ended up appearing more on Fox, which now sells Fed criticism in the conspiracy of elites vein that Trump used to great effect in 2016. Traditional left-leaning media has been less interested, with the exception of Ali Velshi on MSNBC, who happens to have some expertise and understanding of these issues. When Velshi interviewed Prinz, he made sure to tell viewers that her critique was different from the secret society conspiracism right-wingers often toss the Fed's way. He asked her why viewers should care about the issue. She talked about how banks take Fed largesse and use it to buy back their own stock and feed asset bubbles, creating danger and accelerating inequality. All important, but no partisan angle, not really. The one partisan take you could point to is Trump taking credit for a soaring stock market when a lot of its central bank dope when a lot of it is central bank dope in the economy's veins. But the larger problem is a constant one reaching back a decade or more. Nonetheless, I'm sure it wasn't Velshi doing this. The taglines during the Prince interview were almost all about Trump. Here's an example. Trump set to remake Fed to reflect policies. Trump likely to leave lasting fingerprints on Fed. Author, Trump's Fed moves could leave globe devastated. If it's not either for or against Trump, you don't get airtime, Prince says. You kind of have to pick one side. This is the WWE-ization of news, incidentally encouraged by Trump, who has striven from the beginning to inject himself into the headlines. The problem is that this has paid off tremendously for him and for commercial media across the political spectrum, but it hasn't been good for us. The notion of a crisis caused by a bipartisan confluence of powerful interests doesn't fit into the way we cover news today. It would be hard to do a story saying conservative higher education profiteers like the DeVos family are gorging themselves on non-dischargeable, over-available federal student debt of the type congressional Democrats pushed for decades. This might be the truth, but it cannot be marketed because it doesn't compute, not for the modern news audiences. It upsets the format, being
6. Root, don't think. By the early 2000s, TV stations had learned to cover politics exactly as they covered sports, a proven profitable format. The presidential election especially was reconfigured into a sports coverage saga. It was perfect. 18 months of scheduled contests, a preseason, straw polls, regular season, primaries, and playoffs, the general, stadium events, a subgenre of data reporting. It's not an accident that sabermetrics guru Nate Silver fits so seamlessly into political coverage. TV news stations badly copied visual, live variety sports formats for coverage of primary elections, debates, election night, and soon enough Sunday discussion shows like Meet the Press. If you've noticed, the sets bear an eerie resemblance to NFL pre-game shows. There's a reason for that. Panels are typically 2 conservative advocates versus 2 mainstream reporters/analysts who are obviously moderate libs but not allowed to admit it or strongly advocate much of anything, is how Cohen, formerly of Crossfire, puts it. Chuck Todd is Chris Berman, is James Brown, is Wolf Blitzer. The professional talker stands on one side of the panel and tosses to the various energetic advocates for and against the team's chances. Anna Navarro is Terry Bradshaw, Steve Mariucci is Van Jones. Then they mediate the blather when everyone agrees and it all breaks down into conventional wisdom.
I almost think something that he doesn't touch on because he's focusing on mainstream media, but is interesting is that from the alternative media side, what you get is outside of something like Breaking Points, where they kind of simulate that good old fashioned both sides actually having conversations thing, which is at least a breath of fresh air compared to what he's describing here. The general tendency is someone like Vosh, Hassan, or Destiny being one of these people, but missing the other half, just ranting for 12 hours. And then maybe sometimes bringing on somebody to dunk on or use as an example, or playing a video and pausing it every 3 seconds to throw a little gotcha out at it, which is like, it's like what he's pointing out here is bad. But that is like this other level that he doesn't actually get into. But, you know, it's kind of niche, so of course he doesn't get into it.
By the election of 2016, virtually all the sports graphic ideas had been stolen. There were countdown to kickoff clocks for votes, percent chance of victory trackers, our experts pick charts, a magic number for delegate counts, and 100 different graphic doodads helping us keep score in the game. John King fiddling with his maps with Wolf Blitzer on the magic wall has become as much a part of our election mindscape as watching ex-athletes like David Carr or Jalen Rose chart football or hoops plays with civilians like Zach Lowe and Rachel Nichols. You could wallpaper the Grand Canyon with debate coverage, boxing cliches. Try this in the 2020 cycle. See how often you read/hear one or more of these words in a debate story. Spar, pari, jab, knockout, knockdown, glass jaw, uppercut, low blow, counterpunch, rope-a-dope, rabbit punch, sucker punch, in the ring, TKO, or any of about a dozen other terms. It will be shocking if future debates don't have weigh-in ceremonies. Actually, they already do have weigh-in ceremonies for debate shows. Consider a super low-sum special event reuniting Crossfire grads Paul Begala and Tucker Carlson at the Conservative Political Action Conference, in which an announcer introduces the two. Weighing in with years of experience as a commentator for CNN, standing tall beside Bill and Hillary Clinton, Paul Big Government Begala. Begala here actually entered the ring with a triumphant raised hands pose, as in, yes, call me Big Government Begala. In the right corner, standing tall as the founder of the Daily Caller, Tucker Cut It All Carlson. Carlson enters and the two men sit at seats with boxing gloves draped over them. This nonsense has all had the effect of depoliticizing elections and turning them into blunt contests of tactics, fundraising, and rhetorical technique. CNN even pioneered the use of real-time dial surveys of focus groups to help keep political score in debates. It also hardened the winner-take-all vision of politics for audiences. By 2016, we'd raised a generation of viewers who had no conception of politics as an activity that might or should involve compromise. Your team either won or lost, and you felt devastated or vindicated accordingly. We were training rooters instead of readers. Since our own politicians are typically very disappointing, we particularly root for the other side to lose. Being an American in the 1% era is like being a Jets fan whose only conceivable pleasure is rooting against the Patriots. We're haters, but what else is there? And I think we already can see like this sports mindset, like this competitiveness of like saying terrible things about the other team, like the actual fans. Like I just heard a liberal recently who had COVID is like, I'm not trying to spread COVID to anyone who's not a conservative. Like, what? Sorry, what? Like this, it's getting like violent. It's so hateful. Like individual people feel this hatred towards the person who's on the other side in the same way that like, I don't know sports, but like UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, like, hates UNLV, Las Vegas school. It's like this competition. And now it's like the same thing in politics. I don't know sports. I don't know.
No, but it's true, yeah. But that's the thing is like we wanted to be readers, not rooters. Like this is not for us. They don't care about us.
No.
They don't think we should exist. Both sides don't think we should exist. Both sides are like, you're not doing politics. And we're like, you're doing the WWE and you're trying to tell us that it's politics.
Politics. Yeah.
All the people we know who are super gung-ho about this stuff couldn't read to save their lives.
Yeah. The famous appearance of Jon Stewart on Crossfire in 2004 unmasked the conceit of all this. The comedian blasted Carlson from the right and Begala from the left for partisan hackery and nailed them with a simple request: stop fighting and say something nice about an opposing party politician. Carlson was clever enough to say, I like John Kerry, I care about John Kerry, which made him sound human-ish until he spent the rest of the segment trying to hound Stewart into admitting he was a butt boy for Kerry. A central fixation of the right-wing media universe Carlson occupies involves forcing every coastal intellectual to admit he or she is in the tank for the Dems. But he was wrong about Stewart. The uniqueness of The Daily Show, what made it funny, was that it ridiculed both parties. The Bush administration just happened to be more absurd than the Democrats at the time. Meanwhile, when Stewart turned to Begala and asked him to say something nice about George W. Bush, Begala could only say, he'll be unemployed soon. Audiences today will cheer that, but it was a lousy answer. In the show format, emphasis on show, as Cohen says, Begala, a former Clinton advisor, wasn't allowed to break character. Even I could probably think of something nice to say about George W. Bush, his family, his voters, something. But in this business, everyone is on a side and we're always fighting, never looking for common ground. It ruins everyone's suspension of disbelief if we do.
7. No switching teams. That symbolic moment when Paul Begala and Tucker Carlson were unable to find something nice to say about each other has since spilled into all news coverage. The concept of balance, which used to be considered a virtue, has been twisted all the way around to mean a taboo trade practice, a form of dishonesty. Roger Ailes at Fox started this. He made the whole concept of balance an inside joke among right-wing media. It's the reason for the preposterous slogan, fair and balanced, was so effective, both for recruiting conservative viewers and infuriating liberals. Ailes used to say, the news is like a ship. If you take hands off the wheel, it pulls hard to the left. Translation, you need to pull hard the other way to achieve balance overall. Fair and balanced, in other words, was a rip on the idea that standard, dull, third-person New York Times-style media was already balanced. 20 years before it would become a popular rallying cry on the other side, Roger Ailes was essentially using an argument about false balance to market Fox. In recent years, but especially during the 2016 election, an array of Soviet-sounding terms started appearing to describe a new brand of thought crime. Reporters had always taken lots of criticism from right-wing audiences for showing bias. In the last election, those same criticisms started to come from college-educated liberal-leaning audiences. They started to throw around terms like false balance, false equivalency, and both sidism. In late 2016, New York Times public editor Liz Spade started to get lots of angry mail about false balance. Mainly, they were accusations that the Times overcovered Hillary Clinton's emails and legitimized Clinton Foundation stories. There was enough of this that she felt the need to respond to charges in the paper. The problem with false balance doctrine is that it masquerades as rational thinking, she said, adding, what the critics really want is for journalists to apply their own moral and ideological judgments to the candidate. She added a hypothetical. Suppose journalists deem Clinton's use of private email servers a minor offense compared with Trump inciting Russia to influence an American election by hacking into computers. Remember that? Is the next step for a paternalistic media to barely cover Clinton's email so that the public isn't confused about what's more important? Should her email saga be covered at all? It's a slippery slope. Spade probably had no idea that the slippery slope argument was also on its way to being delegitimized as well, but that's another topic. While Spade was pushing back on the false balance controversy, the Times was embracing a significant change internally. The Jim Rutenberg editorial calling for reporters in the Trump age to rethink old norms of objectivity was a significant step. He wrote his piece in August, right as Spade was beginning to engage readers on the balance issue. Rutenberg argued we should reimagine objectivity in a way that would stand up to history's judgment. This was basically code for accepting the argument about making political judgments about impact before writing stories, even newsworthy ones. Was it a major...
Want to say just on the Hillary email thing, I know that like it got to the point where everyone was like, can we stop talking about Hillary's emails? And even Bernie said it. Can we stop talking about Hillary's emails? And it's like, cool. But also, where can a person go for a proper journalistic treatment of that scandal? For instance, I didn't know that she actually had to have people come in and specially install the private server. I thought it was just a private Gmail account, but she had to pay a crew of people to come in and privately install this server. Okay, so where can you find that out? Like where is like the proper treatment of this story? If you, for instance, go to YouTube and search Hillary email, both sides, or Hillary email, the whole story, or Hillary, you won't find anything. I know that's going to blow some people's minds. They're going to think, no, like you'll find a bunch of crazy QAnon people talk. No, you won't. You can't find anything. There's nothing. Even like if you were to say search political debate coverage or something, you can't find anything outside of CNN, CBS, all of these NBC, like all of these different mainstream platforms have taken over YouTube whenever it comes to politics, and anything that deals with political coverage that's alternative has been essentially siloed and hidden from the algorithm for anybody logging on today, unless you trained the algorithms a long time ago. And even then, I can't find it, even though I did do that. So I'm just saying, like, there's nowhere to go to even hear this story. It's like, I was finally like, I want to know, like, what's the situation? I wanted to hear a few different people's stories of what happened, because everyone's like, oh, I'm over it. I don't want to talk about it. It's like, okay, well, I was waiting for the dust to settle on that one. And then I was going to come and read some, sober accounts. You can't find them on the internet. That's crazy to me. So, all right. It's fine. Oh, TYT. You will find TYT, the Young Turks. You will find the Young Turks if you look for political alternative like coverage. But outside of TYT, you can't find anything that isn't one of these mainstream old guard platforms.
Was it a major step for the Times? I know I thought so, and a few other reporters did. So did Spade. I thought it was, she says. And didn't they put it on the front? They did. The Rutenberg Clarion call about norms of objectivity ran on their page A1, the choicest real estate in American media. This said a lot about what the paper was thinking. After Trump won, Spade made what many considered the unforgivable offense of going on Tucker Carlson's TV show. Carlson opened by brandishing the day after Times headline about Trump's win. Democrats, students, and foreign allies face the reality of a Trump presidency. The Times, of course, is not obligated to celebrate a Trump presidency, but this headline was a major stylistic departure. It was less reporting than audience signaling, a blunt list of demographics. The sane among us brace for Trump presidency. Spade pushed back when Carlson called this advocacy and said it was something more subtle and maybe worse, an unrecognized point of view that comes from being in New York in a certain circle and seeing the world in a certain way. In a classic example of the always attacking style of TV conservatives, Carlson didn't accept the olive branch Spade was trying to offer. Instead, he just kept pounding away. He quizzed her on reporters' political bias. Spade had protested that the paper's reporters tried hard to be fair and professional, but Carlson scoffed. I wouldn't believe you, he said, except that I know for a fact it isn't true. Or I would believe you, he said, except that I know for a fact this isn't true. He then read off a series of horrified anti-Trump tweets written by Times-line reporters. Liam Stacks, the Electoral College was meant to stop men like Trump from taking office, was an example. Are you kidding me? Carlson snapped. Spade nodded and said, yeah, I think it's outrageous. This was a line that would be much howled over, because it gave pro-Trump types and people like Carlson a talking point, another unforgivable offense. But Spade's point was not that having political views is bad, or that too many reporters are liberals. Rather, she was saying a reporter airing personal political views in public was unseemly, at least according to that paper's venerable standard. She noted, we all have personal political beliefs, but they ought to be personal, and when you sign up to be a journalist, that's what you ought to be. I watched the Carlson interview of Spade after colleagues insisted I click to see how awful she was. I did, and was shocked. I thought reporters misunderstood. Spade was taking a view that 10 years ago would have been completely uncontroversial. It was very old-school Times, and in a way, very pro-reporter. In the age before social media, most reporters didn't have to expose their political opinions to the world. Today, everyone is effectively an op-ed writer. Spade's take was, this isn't necessarily a good idea, and exposes both reporters and papers like the Times to accusations of bias in ways we never had to worry about before. Spade today recalls that summer with dismay. She was no fan of candidate Donald Trump, but felt she couldn't say so in her position. She also knew that opening a discussion about false balance was dangerous. I knew I was poking the bear, she says now. I figured the bear would probably poke back. But she did it because she felt it was important to argue a general principle, trying to hold on to that value. By that value, she meant the very old Times principle of reporters at least pretending to keep their own views separate from the topics they covered. In the new environment, however, arguing this was only understood as doing something for the other side. It's just a way of disguising the argument to say, oh, she's a Republican, she says. Not only did the Times end up firing Spade, they eliminated her position. Even journalists of long experience cheered her dismissal in terms that were remarkably harsh. Gizmodo called her incompetent. The Daily Beast said she was failed, while Slate went with failing. Spade wrote, Vox was so bad at her job that the elimination of her role might be seen as an improvement. This is another feature of the new media environment. Conventional wisdom is now capable of doing full U-turns virtually overnight. Spade was taking heat essentially for defending an approach that less than a year before had been industry standard: objectivity. The neutral-sounding third-person tone we use to understand as objectivity was itself primarily a commercial strategy. In the early days of mass media, the big press enterprises operated in artificially scarce markets. Limited numbers of FCC licenses for broadcasters and the gigantic expense of maintaining and building distribution networks for newspapers meant most media outlets were only taking on a competitor or two. Big daily newspapers had gravy trains of captive local advertisers. TV and radio shows could charge fortunes for scarce ad time. What this meant for journalism was a stress on inoffensiveness. Radio broadcaster Lowell Thomas, who at one point was the primary source of news for over 10% of the country, once said that his first radio sponsor, the Literary Digest, insisted that he report everything down the middle. Thomas became famous for his opening line, "Good morning, everybody." The appeal to an everybody audience became the template for commercial success. Contrast this with Roger Ailes once bragging about making a network for people 55 to dead, or even the Times headline aimed at Democrats, students, and foreigners. Their normal voice was even unemotional and above the fray in a way that was often easy to lampoon. But the fact that objectivity was less about principle than profit, stylistically silly, and easily manipulated into masking all sorts of awful political realities, historically, from racism to American military atrocities abroad, didn't mean it was worthless. Objectivity, above all, was great protection for reporters. Having no obvious political bent was a prerequisite for taking on politicians. If you announced yourself as an ally of one party or another, you lost your credibility with audiences. Balance didn't mean having to quote science deniers. It was mainly a way for journalists to stay out of unspoken political alliances. Once you jump in that pit, it's not so easy to get out. 2 years ago,
one thing about the having no obvious political bent was a prerequisite for taking on politicians. If you announced yourself as an ally of one party or another, you lost your credibility with audiences. I just want to say, like, part of like the post-trust moment, why don't they trust us, that he talks about throughout this. I don't think he ever quite says it this way, but yeah, there's a percentage of each side or both sides that only trust somebody who's willing to put their cards on the table and say what their values and their presuppositions are, etc., and that never, never actually trusted this feigned neutrality or this attempt at objectivity. But as I was saying earlier, the 50% of the country is voting, and only 12% of each side is deciding primaries. That leaves the other like 50% of Americans who don't feel like this thing works, right? Probably still are represented in this statement. If you announce yourself as an ally of one party or another, you lost your credibility with audiences. I think that most working people don't trust the news because both sides are clearly so biased that they're just looking for stories that will make them look good or make their audiences feel good. And most people go, yeah, that's fucking bullshit. How am I supposed to sort through this? How am I supposed to make sense of this? I can't. I give up on it. And it just pisses people off. And I feel it too. I like to bring up regular working people because I'm talking about non-PMC, mobile, upwardly mobile, college-educated people. I'm talking about just like construction workers, grocery store stockers, warehouse workers at Amazon, outside of like these the extreme minority of workers who actually identify with one of the two sides of the news. Most people are like, yeah, no, it's all just so biased. And then you're supposed to double down on this lesser evilist logic. But I'm sorry, like you lose credibility when you clearly have an axe to grind in everything you do. Well, maybe it's more like that other metaphor, that idiom with when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when everything you have has to say Trump bad, then of course, what is the news going to look like? People don't take it seriously, and they shouldn't, and we shouldn't. It's fucking bullshit. I'm getting angry just thinking about it. Anyway.
2 years ago, unnerved by a lot of the same comments about false balance, I wrote, the model going forward will likely involve Republican media covering Democratic corruption and Democratic media covering Republican corruption. This is more or less where we are now, and nobody seems to think this is bad or dysfunctional. This is despite the fact that in this format, especially given the individuated distribution mechanisms of the internet, like the Facebook newsfeed, the average person will no longer even see, ever, derogatory reporting about his or her own side. Being out of touch with what the other side is thinking is now no longer seen as a fault. It's a requirement because...
Rule number 8. The other side is literally Hitler.
It seems like this problem has gotten worse since Taibbi wrote this, especially, maybe I'm not paying enough attention to the right, but like especially in leftist activist spaces, it's just taking these horrible, horrible things, white supremacist, fascist, racist, and just, you're just this, you're just that, you're just that, you're basically just Hitler.
We got called neo-reactionaries for doing the Underground Theory volume because one of the people in it says something that they don't like. And this was not just by a rando, not a complete rando, somebody with some symbolic clout, somebody with some social and cultural capital, and then backed up by the guys at Acid Horizon, right?
It's like, that's some great journalism.
Yeah. So, yeah, the other side is literally Hitler. If you don't wear a mask, then that's white supremacy, right? Like that was the we saw somebody say that 2 years after 2020. Like they said it like 6 months ago.
Yeah, sometime during 2023, I think. It's like, oh dear.
Shortly after 9/11, Fox began a long streak at the top of the cable ratings. Beginning in the first quarter of 2002, the company was #1 for over 15 years straight. A crucial part of its success was its reaction to 9/11. Post-attack America was afraid and in need of someone to blame. Fox and its minions were more than happy to comply. They began using language about liberals that was extreme even by their standards. Their fellow Americans, leading conservative thinkfluencers, told them were not just lily-livered suck-ups who pretended to be enlightened. They were actively in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, murderers, traitors, not wrong, but evil. Fox promoted Sean Hannity as their perfect vision of conservative manhood. The rectum-faced blowhard was celebrated for his fake daily victories over the intellectual Washington Generals act that was Alan Colmes. Unlike Rush Limbaugh, who in his early days was a serviceably witty top 40 disc jockey in Pittsburgh, Hannity was charmless. He was not literate like William Safire or Bill Buckley, nor was he an entertainingly unstable wreck like Glenn Beck, nor could he talk volubly about Marx and other thinkers like Michael Savage, a person who clearly has read more than 3 or 4 books. Hannity wouldn't know the difference between Marcuse and a cucumber, the Frankfurt School and a Frankfurter. He won fake arguments, preened and spewed constant aggression. After 9/11, one of his signature lines of attack was that liberals were in league with terrorists. He wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil, Defeating Terrorism, Despotism, and Liberalism that came out in 2004. It was a paint-by-numbers, hate-your-neighborhood manual, whose blunt cover was just Hannity's coiffed head floating under the Statue of Liberty's armpit.
See, this is what I mean. Like, this book is fun because you can just hear his like, seething, I don't give a fuckness in this book. It's great.
And he used to use the same style just to attack the right and just to, like, because he's talking about how he used to just do this exact same thing. He used to do this. Like, he wrote a whole book about Trump, calling him a insane clown or something like that. And it's like, so he's really good at these plays on words, and it's fun to see him turn it against the media in general. The main argument was that liberals, by refusing to accept the existence of terrorist evil, were themselves of the nexus of wrongdoing. They were insufficiently stoked about the capture and hanging of Saddam Hussein, and let's face it, wimps. He held off for 2 whole pages before bringing up Neville Chamberlain. Many others chimed in. Ann Coulter's redundant classic was Treason, Liberal Treachery from the Cold War to the War on Terrorism. Savage's windy effort, The Enemy Within, Saving America from the Liberal Assault on Our Schools, Faith, and Military, contributed the keyword enemy. He would later go with Liberalism is a Mental Disorder.
Damn.
I mean, Lenin's would be like, yeah, dude. He wrote the infantile left, piece. So if you're keeping score at home, Americans were being told they were surrounded by millions of people who were in league with homicidal terrorists plotting to overthrow free enterprise and install a dictatorship of political correctness. Liberals were also clinically insane. Glenn Beck would take Hannity's Neville Chamberlain thread and run lap after lap with it, pioneering the "your neighbor is literally Hitler" movement. Beck was awesome at this. Al Gore was Hitler. Obama was constantly Hitler. The National Endowment of the Arts was Hitler. It's propaganda. You should look up the term. He said, it's propaganda. You should look up the name Goebbels. Acorn was Hitler. The bailouts were Hitler. Well, they actually were a little bit Hitler. Comedian Louis Black and the hilarious Daily Show freak out when Beck compared even the Peace Corps to the SS. As Black put it, it was 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, except there's just 1 degree, and Kevin Bacon is Hitler. Beck was a mixed metaphor enthusiast who was capable of calling a target both fascist and communist, Hitler and Stalin, in the same telecast. But his money gimmick was Hitler. It won him a huge audience until it also ruined him. His Fox show was canceled in 2011 after he said Barack Obama had a deep-seated hatred for white people. Within 2 years, he was apologizing for being divisive, but still carrying around a napkin that supposedly contained Hitler's bloodstains. Wait, is that real? Is that a thing? There's nowhere to go from Hitler. It's a rhetorical dead end. Argument is over at that point. If you go there, you're now absolving your audiences of all moral restraint, because who wouldn't kill Hitler? You can draw a straight line from these rhetorical escalations to right-wing media to the lunacies of the Trump era. If you can believe the Peace Corps is the SS, then why doubt Muslims in Jersey City were cheering 9/11 or question the logic of an anti-rape wall across the Rio Grande? Stupid is stupid. When Donald Trump ran for office, he posed serious problems for anyone conscious of Godwin's law. As Chomsky points out, Trump's campaign was a familiar authoritarian pitch. Go after the elites, even while you're supported by the major elites. His stump speeches hit a lot of notes to which history professors quickly perked up. He preached that modern life was a failure of decadence. This from a man whose personal life was a monument to tacky consumption. And 5 marriages? He told of a once pre-proud society in ruins, surrounded by mongrel assassins. They kill us, he said in his opening speech. They're laughing at us, at our stupidity. They're killing us. This is a speech. A strong hand was needed to help our return to national values. He attacked left and right ideologies. Democracy was undemocratic, an aristocratic trick, rigged. In a debate with Hillary Clinton, he threatened to jail his opponent, a stunt that would have impressed Mobutu. Anyone with an education saw the parallels. But Trump was legally winning elections, and he was bolstered by the fact that his riffs on corrupt elites rang true with audiences. The financial bailouts had been an extraordinary betrayal of the population of the political class, which is why Trump scored when he painted Ted Cruz and Hillary Clinton as creatures of Goldman Sachs. Citizens United meant political bribery on a grand scale was legal, and this theme helped Trump knock out Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. He ripped the Koch brothers and denounced his primary opponents as sock puppet fronts for corporate PACs. Then he did the same to Hillary Clinton. These clowns are just fronts for someone else's money, Trump told voters. With me, I am the money. Trump, like all great con artists, depended upon true details to sell lies. Except that, as we were doing in our Gora's reading earlier, these guys aren't entrepreneurs. They aren't real businessmen. They inherit wealth, and the wealth is able to incessantly reproduce itself. And they have, for the most part, dispersed the power functions within their organizations. They just get to sit in the ownership capacity. They're not in the controlling or managing capacity. The major challenge for reporters in covering Trump was to explain his rise. There were a million reasons, beginning with the billions in free coverage he received. He certainly played on racial panic and feelings of lost status. This was a dominant theme of his announcement speech, how low we'd sunk, how we never win anymore, etc. The failures of decades of policy with little real wage growth since the Nixon era were surely also a factor. It was complicated. You couldn't say it wasn't. There were 4chan crazies and elderly church ladies alike in the Trump coalition. Trump was a vote for anyone with a grudge, and in America, there is a spectacularly wide spectrum of grudges. I met one voter in Wisconsin who said the following: I usually don't vote, but I'm going Trump because fuck everything. Sometime in the spring or summer of 2016, I started to notice blowback every time I mentioned the economy in connection with Trump voters. Very quickly, it's amazing how fast these trends gain traction in the social media age. The use of the term economic insecurity became a meme-worthy offense on social media. Greg Sargent of the Washington Post posted quotes of Trump voters saying, "Build a wall, kill them all. Trump that bitch," and "kill her" above the punchline. Can't you just feel the economic insecurity and desire for disruption? All of this roughly coincided with Clinton saying in September that half of Trump's supporters were racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it, when she deemed what she deemed a basket of deplorables. Yeah. Imagine Hillary Clinton uttering the words Islamophobic about other people. The irony. If the irony is lost on you, DM me. I'll send you something. Most outsiders recognize this as a political mistake on par with Romney's 47% gaffe. According to the book Shattered, Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, it was Clinton's first unforced error of the fall, or so her staffers were said to have thought. But the unforced error soon became gospel in the press, and I would say the general PMC, liberal to leftist alike. Saturday Night Live's Racists for Trump skit from earlier in the year, which showed Trumpers in swastika armbands and Klan hoods and so on, became the go-to exclusive explanation for Trump's rise. The conventional wisdom was that Trump was Hitler, effectively, even before he got elected. Is Donald Trump a fascist? Was the Times book review headline shortly before the vote. Several authors said yes. After Trump was elected, a whole new line of rhetoric was unveiled in connection with Russiagate. It became common, encouraged even, to use words like traitor and treason in headlines. After the fiasco of Charlottesville, when Trump couldn't bring himself to denounce open racists and said instead that both sides were at fault, the terms white supremacist and white nationalist became common to describe Trump's tenure. It was one thing to apply the terms to Trump, who deserves all of these epithets and then some. But his voters? Did it really make sense to caricaturize 60 million people as racist, white nationalist, traitor Nazis?
I think this is where like the digital literacy and the media literacy comes in here, because I can reflect on my own like experience during the 2016 election, and I just literally believed it all. It was just what I was being fed. And so when Trump was elected, I was sobbing. I was like, oh my gosh, half the country or enough of the country to vote for Trump, like, doesn't care about me as a woman, doesn't care about Black people. Like I so believed it. And that's not necessarily a reflection on like me, but it was just like, I didn't have any media literacy. I didn't realize what the media was doing and how it created this division. And so me, this poor like 16-year-old girl, just absolutely distraught that like we were about to go to war with North Korea because Trump would say something to trigger Kim Jong-un, or that, yeah, half the country was racist.
Rocket Man.
Rocket Man. Yeah, and so like understanding that this is just the trend, that they all just throw out the word Hitler and racist and xenophobic on both sides, like it's no big deal. Like they've built it up to be this competition of one side is good, one side is evil. Just being like having that knowledge can make you go, oh, like take a step back, not believe everything you see. And yeah, being a little bit more wise in how you react so it doesn't like viscerally affect you so much. Because at the end of the day, Trump being president or Biden being president or Obama being president isn't actually doing anything to address like actual issues of systemic inequality, to address the minimum wage, like to address anything bad that's going on. It's like nothing actually got worse with Trump, other than it was kind of embarrassing that he was like representing the United States of America. But nothing's actually getting better with Biden. He's also an embarrassment to be representing the United States of America. Like they're like, oh, Biden came in and fixed everything. He's like, he's bad in a different way. Anyways.
Come on, Jack.
The supposed sequels to Charlottesville, one rally in Boston, another one a year later in Washington, were jokes. Maybe a dozen mental health cases surrounded by thousands of furious anti-racist protesters, trailed by packs of reporters. But scary photos of the loons became fodder for the new party line, which is that we could turn off the thinking mechanism and move to pure combat. Charles Taylor and the Boston Globe, in a column under a scary photo of a man waving a swastika, summed it up when he scoffed, those bent on understanding Trump supporters, as if there is something deep to understand, wonder how his working class acolytes can vote against their own economic interests. What they refuse to see is that all Trump supporters, from the working class to the upper class, have voted their chief interest, maintaining American identity as white, Christian, and heterosexual. Yeah. The one thing that everyone should have realized, I'm just going to throw in there, is that if you think that Trump had anything to do with Christianity and you're actually going to attribute that, like, then you clearly fucking don't get it. And yeah, it's not about people's actual economic interests, but it is about their libidinal economic interests. And that's the point, is that people who are evangelical Christian right-wingers are more invested in the jouissance of being anti-liberal PMC than they are in actual Christian anything. And that's why they'll go for a Trump, because it has nothing to do with Christianity. In fact, they'd also go for, guess what? Trump could have been gay. They wouldn't have given a shit. It's the same thing with all these divorces. They don't fucking care. Porn stars, they don't care. That's the point. It's about jouissance. But that jouissance is based in genuine class antagonism. That's the part that does have to do with something economic. It's because the only way that people can find any meaning or resist at all is to somehow throw something into the gears, to somehow fuck with a liberal coastal elite, right? Like, yeah. Before you can argue the justice of this point, realize what it means. If we're now saying all Trump supporters are mainly bent on upholding the supremacy of white Christian heterosexuals, that's miles beyond even Hillary Clinton's take of just half of Trump supporters being irredeemable scum. It's a sweeping, debate-ending dictum. There is us and them, and they are Hitler, right? And so these people think that Hillary lost by saying half of Trump's supporters were these people, were like racist or whatever. But then within months, as he's pointing out, it became a norm to say that. Okay, well, that was a losing strategy, though, but they've normalized it. It's a sweeping, debate-ending dictum. There is us and them, and they are Hitler. When I first started to hear this talk among reporters during 2016, I thought it was just clickbait. Of course, race was a dominant factor in Trump's rise. Virtually all Republican politicians from the Goldwater days on, and all Southern Democrats before, made race a central part of their pitches. The appeals were usually somewhat coded, but whether it was Goldwater blasting urban marauders, or Reagan's welfare queens, or Willie Horton, or Jesse Helms and his white hands, the messages weren't exactly subtle. Trump blew past those parameters, of course, and his lunatic inability to renounce the KKK or Nazis surely dragged us all into new depths. But racism as the sole explanation for Trump's rise was suspicious for a few reasons, chief of which being that it completely absolved either political party. Both the Republican and Democratic Party establishments were rejected in 2016, in some cases for overlapping reasons, of having helped create the preconditions for Trump. That absolution, yeah. Trump doesn't happen to be a country.
Happen in a country.
Trump doesn't happen in a country where things are going well. People give in to their baser instincts when they lose faith in the future. The pessimism and anger necessary for this situation has been building for a generation, and not all on one side, right? Like that's like the way that Norman Finkelstein talks about people in Palestine not having a future and being in mass interned in an area you're not allowed to leave that is smaller than 5 miles, and there's more than 1 million people there. I forget how many millions of people there. Not being able to leave your entire life. Imagine being a guy growing. I'm just going to go with guys because guys need to be able to fucking go places and get out and do shit. Like they really need to, or they fucking go crazy. And you've got these guys being interned, mass interned. And so when people are trying to get him to condemn the actions of Hamas, he's like, yeah, I just can't imagine what I would do if I had never gotten outside of a area that's only 5 miles in size and there are that many people there. It is the most highly condensed population of humans on the planet, more than Hong Kong, right? More than anything in China. Like that's crazy. And so, but the same thing can be said really of anybody who's facing the fact that there is no future, which is a class thing as well. And so like, you know, Palestine's an extreme, but this is true of the future in general, which is why Sean Middlestad's piece in Underground Theory is fucking golden. He's talking about future trauma. Instead of it's the trauma of something that happened to you, it's the trauma of the closure of the future, right? Which you could say is capitalist realism, but it's a little bit more deep when what he's talking about is like Huey P. Newton losing hope before, like people say, oh, the Black Panthers disintegrated because Huey P. Newton lost himself. Like he kind of went off the rails. But Sean Middlestad's point is he went off the rails because he had an honest assessment of the possibilities of the Black Panthers, and he realized based off of that honest assessment, there's no future here. And that is traumatic when everything you've sacrificed for doesn't have a way forward. All right. Future trauma, Underground Theory, buy it now. A significant number of Trump voters voted for Obama 8 years ago. A lot of those were in Rust Belt states that proved critical to his election. What happened there? Trump also polled 2-1 among veterans, despite his own horrific record of deferments and his insulting of every vet from John McCain to Humayun Khan. Was it possible that his rhetoric about ending our current policy of regime challenge or regime change resonated with recently returned vets? The data said yes. It may not have been decisive, but it likely was one of many factors. It was also common sense because this was one of his main themes on the campaign trail. Trump clearly smelled those veteran votes. The Trump phenomenon was also about a political and media taboo, class. When the liberal arts grads who mostly populate the media think about class, we tend to think in terms of the heroic worker or whatever Marx-inspired cliche they taught us in college. Because of this, most pundits scoff at class because they look at Trump crowds. Because when they look at Trump crowds, they don't see Norma Ray or Matawan. Instead, they see Married with Children, a bunch of tacky mall goers with gobble up crap movies and incidentally hate the noble political press. Our take on Trump voters was closer to Orwell than Marx. In reality, very little was known about the proles. It was not necessary to know much. Beyond the utility that calling everything racism had for both party establishments, it was good for the other sector, the news media. If all Trump supporters are Hitler and all liberals are also Hitler, this brings Crossfire to its natural conclusion. The America versus America show is now Hitler versus Hitler. Think of the ratings. The new show leaves out 100 million people who didn't vote at all, a group that by itself is nearly as big as both the Clinton and Trump electorates combined. But this is part of the propaganda. Non-voters are the single biggest factor in American political life, and their swelling numbers are, just like the Trump phenomenon, a profound indictment of our system. But they don't exist on TV because they suspend our disbelief in the Hitler versus Hitler show. We don't want you thinking about anything complicated. Not non-voters, not war fatigue, not the collapse of the manufacturing sector, not Fed policy, none of that. None of what happened in 2016 is your fault. It's all the pure evil of white nationalism. For conservatives, it's the opposite. Don't believe anything in the New York Times. Don't think about the impact of upper-class tax cuts and deregulation. Just stay in your lane. Remember, you are surrounded by determined enemies out to destroy tradition, the nuclear family, increase your taxes, take your job and your gun, and remove your president by any means, legal or illegal. It's a fight for all the marbles. Politics today is about one side against the other, and there's only one take allowed: pure aggression.
Rule 9. In the fight against Hitler, everything is permitted. Cohen's take on Crossfire was right. The early stage TV battles depended on a propaganda trick for their success. The networks didn't want to encourage constructive political activism, so the fight always involved a ferocious, deregulation mad, race-baiting winger pounding the crap out of a spineless, backpedaling, centrist masquerading as a leftist. Cohen's Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, did a field guide to TV's lukewarm liberals that explained how this works. Michael Kinsley, probably the most famous voice from the left, once described himself as a wishy-washy moderate and added, "There is no way that I'm as far left as Pat Buchanan is right." Cokie or Cookie?
Cokie.
Cokie
Yes.
Roberts played the liberal on The Week, but her main liberal credentials were that she was a woman who'd been on NPR. Her advice to Bill Clinton after the midterm losses of 1994 moved to the right, which is the advice that somebody should have given him a long time ago. Crossfire even once hired corporate lobbyist Bob Beckel, who called Gulf War protesters punks for playing the from the left role. If your only experience of life was watching these shows, you might conclude that the chief problem of American politics is one of tactics. Why does Paul Begala let Tucker Carlson just pound away at him like that? Why is he such a wuss? When you watched these shows, you were always looking at an aggressor and a conciliator. From the right always looked more confident because it was representing a real political agenda. When Tucker Carlson denounced unions, he meant it. When Paul Begala blathered that unions were all-American, essential for democracy, he looked like he was spouting pat gibberish, because he was. He had worked for the administration that passed NAFTA and pioneered the Democrats' move away from union money and union infrastructure toward big business cash to support campaigns. After years of this phony debate, along came Trump, who could easily have been a crossfire actor, although the 90s version of very pro-choice Trump probably would have played on the left. The modern Trump is pretty much exactly Buchanan, right down to the race views and the appropriation of trade issues, only he's better at playing the heel. For most of liberal America, the election played out like an old crossfire episode. Trump pounded away at Clinton and refused to take back even the most shameless behaviors. Meanwhile, Clinton tried to observe decorum, apologized for her unforced errors, like the deplorables comment, and was unrewarded for her efforts. Years ago, when Jon Stewart went on Crossfire, he did what most liberal TV watchers had been waiting for someone to do for ages. He called Carlson a dick. Hugely satisfying. Great TV. But that's all it was. Great TV. The solution wasn't to create more satisfying entertainment. The solution was to have better politics, or more real politics, something that was not a staged fight. Begala's problem wasn't that he was a weenie and insufficiently aggressive, it was that he didn't stand for anything. This was Stewart's larger point about how the phony combat was hurting America. It wasn't educational, it wasn't political in any meaningful way. After Trump won, though, another consensus formed. Liberal America had to be less polite. Samantha Bee was a pioneer, calling Ivanka Trump a feckless cunt. Creaky old Robert De Niro, he was tough. He once played a boxer, won the internet when he said, "Fuck Trump" at an awards show. Wow. When a restaurant owner in D.C. refused to serve Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the wake of the Trump immigration mess, and cadaverous Trump aide Stephen Miller was called a fascist by a protester at a Mexican restaurant, this quickly triggered a farcical media debate about civility.
This is, I just have to say, like, part of the reason why, like, the resistance moment from the liberals really ruined cussing for me. Like, it's like when they saying fuck Trump or feckless cunt, when that becomes like when that becomes considered like resistance somehow, when that's considered like edgy or subversive, when we all know it's not, it kind of steals the glory of actual, cursing, swearing, cussing, because these are the people who aren't supposed to be doing it. Now that they're doing it, it's like,
yeah, I did it.
now it's like, whatever, guys. I guess the only thing we can do is be smarter than you.
Yeah. Politicians were asked to chime in. Maxine Waters was one of the first to endorse the "yes, you may bother assholes at restaurants" idea. Hillary Clinton, who once insisted when they go low, we go high, had enough and co-signed. Clinton said, "You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you care about." She added, "Civility can start again when Democrats retake the White House." Before long, it was a media trope that civility was actually a repressive thing, a balm to fascism. Incivility was a requirement, a show of solidarity. Fuck civility was the Guardian's take. Trump officials don't get to eat dinner in peace, not while kids are in cages. Before long, it was typical for once-staid media figures and elected officials alike to swear like sea captains in public. Harper's Bazaar didn't just call Trump's claims about Obama's border policies wrong, they were bullshit. Even the headline read, "Bullshit," in Harper's Bazaar. By the time the Kavanaugh debate rolled around, the floor of the U.S. Senate sounded like the set of Goodfellas. Senator Mazie Hirono on Senator Chuck Grassley, "That is such bullshit, I can hardly stand it." Senator Lindsey Graham to Senator Bob Mendez, "What y'all have done is bullshit." That was on TV. Mendez tweeting on the FBI investigation of Kavanaugh, "It's a bullshit investigation." Watching all of this had me weirded out, among other things, because I was famous for my own use of bad language. I was infamous for my own use of bad language in print and had been trying for years to weed it out of my work. I thought, now this is okay? When I realized the trend toward nastier language was based on a faulty syllogism, civility got us nowhere. The uncivil Donald Trump won, therefore we must be uncivil to win. Actually, none of those three things have anything to do with one another. Democratic voters were nowhere after 2016 for a lot of reasons, and very few of them had anything to do with being insufficiently rude. Trump was uncivil and did win, but about the last thing in the world any sane person would advise is following his example. During the race, I kept trying to imagine how someone like Martin Luther King would have responded to Trump. I don't think the answer would have been, "We need to start saying fuck more." Does Stephen Miller have the right to enjoy an enchilada in peace? I have no idea. Probably not. Is this a question of earth-shattering importance? Also probably not. The incivility movement is not about politics. It's about money and audience. In a hyper-competitive media environment where 1 billion pieces of content per day are created on platforms like Facebook, one has to work in overdrive to win eyeballs. Which headline is the Hawaiian Democrat going to click on first? Ballast discharge measure won't protect Hawaii's coastal waters, or 11 times Marie Hirono had 0 fucks to give. Scatological blather scores, shares, and retweets, and now that there's no ideological or commercial requirement to avoid pissing off the whole audience, no more "good morning, everybody," there's no disincentive to using the strongest language. That's why this stuff is coming out in factory level amounts on both sides now. It's why Samantha Bee at this very moment is searching the internet for a word worse than cunt, and why ostensibly devout Christians love it in 2020 when Donald Trump calls his Democratic opponent a cocksucker or a whore, just as I watched them cheer in New Hampshire when he called Ted Cruz a pussy. Meanness and vulgarity build political solidarity, but also audience solidarity. Breaking barriers together builds conspiratorial closeness. In the Trump age, it helps political and media objectives align. The problem is there's no natural floor to this behavior. Just as cable TV will eventually become 700 separate 24-hour porn channels, news and commentary will eventually escalate to boxing-style, expletive-laden pre-fight tirades and the open incitement of violence. And if the other side is literally Hitler, that this eventually has to happen. It would be illogical to argue anything else. What began as America versus America will eventually move to traitor versus traitor, and the show does not work if those contestants are not eventually offended to the point of wanting to kill one another.
Rule
The 3
10.
grandmas.
Yeah. Hunt stain, by the way, is a word that I like. We have to keep pushing it. We have to keep taking it further.
Oh dear.
Like,
Not sold Ann on until you've sold Ann on it. I'm not on board.
That's right.
I'm married, man. You can't. There are bridges I cannot burn now.
You say whatever you want, Nance.
I have to sell out. I have to sell out to some degree. I have a ring. Anyway, let's go. I'm staying. Oh my god. Wait till Holly hears that shit. What?
Mute.
Okay.
Rule 10, feel superior. Hunter Pauly is a young writer based in Montana. He started as an intern at the Montana Standard, which at the time was doing hardcore local investigative work, often on environmental issues. Pauly got into this line of work because punching up seems like the only worthwhile thing to do in journalism. When the Standard's crime beat opened, Pauly took the job and found that he was being asked to pump out an endless stream of stories about poor people doing stupid things. Pauly soon found himself feeling uneasy. He was in one of the worst gigs in journalism, a local crime beat. His job mostly consisted of getting details from a public official, like a police spokesperson, who would give him the state's version of low-rent arrests. Few think about this, but the press routinely puts the names and personal information of people arrested in newspapers, on TV, and, worst of all, online, where the stories live forever. Yet these people have not been convicted of crimes. They have merely been arrested or charged. I was getting third-hand info from someone like a public information officer, and we were routinely publishing stories without getting the point of view of the person it affected the most, Pauly recalls. And this kind of crime reporting, we typically don't even take the most basic steps, such as seeking confirmation from a secondary source. I wasn't out there covering murders every single day, Pauly recalls. There just wasn't a lot of crime. Maybe someone goes running down the street naked because they can't afford their meds, or shoplifts from a Walmart because they're broke. Sometimes there would be nights when nothing at all would happen. So I'd tell my editor, hey, nothing happened. And he'd say, just find something, because he can't afford for there to be nothing. Pauly began to feel conflicted, particularly about putting information about people's arrests online, which would prevent them from getting jobs in the future, as well as affect them in all sorts of ways. He tried to pitch his paper on more important subjects, like abnormally high rates of lead in the blood of children born in Butte, but it was a no-go. I had 3 surefire investigations in a row spiked, says Pauly. Things came to a head after he ran a story about a guy who escaped from custody after a mental health evaluation. Police called the man Dickface because of an unfortunately shaped tattoo. The Dickface story went viral, and Pauly began to think about leaving the job. He began self-editing, leaving out stories about people shoplifting from Walmart, despite how frequently it happened and how much readers loved laughing about it. Looking back, he explains, there are people in the world worth laughing at. They're called politicians. But these people? Pauly ended up quitting journalism, writing about his decision in The Guardian. What's remarkable about Pauly's story is how rare it is. Pauly happened to be in one of the worst corners of the game, covering crime, which is a genre primarily concerned with needlessly stoking class and racial fears on the one hand, while making people feel superior on the other. But the core dynamic of his job was not much different from what most of us do. We're mainly in the business of stroking audiences. We want them coming back. Anger is part of the rhetorical promise, but so are feelings of righteousness and superiority. It's why we love terrible people like Casey Anthony or OJ as news subjects a lot more than we'd like someone who spends his or her days working in a pediatric oncology ward. Showing genuinely heroic or selfless people on TV would make most audiences feel inferior. Therefore, we don't. It's the same premise as reality shows. The most popular programs aren't about geniuses and paragons of virtue, but instead about terrible parents, morons, people too fat to notice they're pregnant, people willing to be filmed getting ass tucks, spoiled rich people, and other folks we could deem freaks, which is why Hoarders is the most horrifying fucking TV show ever made. It's horrifying, it's depressing, it's crazy. But it's people who have internalized this logic of accumulation to the point where it causes dysfunction, and so we laugh at them. It's horrible.
Yeah, all the shows on the TLC, which is called The Learning Channel, are now just My 600-Pound Life, Toddlers and Tiaras, John and Kate +8. Like all these shows about these families that, or these people who like are living tough lives, or it's just something that's like interesting and exploitative, and it's like, this is television now.
Yeah. Suck. Why use the most
Make your anything to make your crusty fucking shit ass day feel slightly normal in contrast to how shitty those people are, right?
Yeah. Why use the most advanced communications technology in history to teach people basic geography? Or how World Bank structural adjustment lending works, when we can instead show people idiots drinking donkey semen for money? Your media experience is designed to nurture and protect your ego. So we show you the biggest losers we can find. It's the underlying principle of almost every successful entertainment product we've had, from Cops to Freak Show to literally The Biggest Loser. We're probably just a few years away from a show called What Would You What Would You Suck for $1? This dynamic was confined to the entertainment arena for a while, but it became part of political coverage long ago. As far back as 1984, the Republican Party was urging people to vote Reagan because Walter Mondale was a born loser. On the flip side, the name George McGovern became so synonymous with loser that it birthed an entirely new brand of third-way politics, invented by the Democratic Leadership Council and people like Chuck Robb, Al Frum, Sam Nunn, and Bill Clinton. The chief principle of this new politics was that it had a chance of winning. The media started following along. We invented the wimp factor for George H.W. Bush and saddled Dan Quayle with the bimbo tag. This was propaganda, of course, as the idea was that politicians could only not be losers by bombing someone. But we were also telling audiences that a loser was someone who didn't attack. In the early 90s, the Weekly Standard wrote that Republicans wanted Quayle to dispel his bimbo image by showing some teeth, Spiro Agnew style. Agnew is one of the biggest disgraces in the history of American politics, a blowhard with no discernible ideas beyond the promiscuous use of every conceivable form of political corruption. Yet in the American consciousness, he's not a loser, he's an aggressor. Presidential campaign coverage as far back as the early 2000s was basically Heathers on an airplane. We developed lots of words for loser and spent countless hours developing new methods of telling audiences which candidates were in that category. Dennis Kucinich, who was constantly ridiculed in the press plane for both his shortness and his earnestness, was dubbed the lovable loser of the left. The contravening kind of story was usually about the abject dumbness of Republicans. I actually won an award for such an effort, an article about Mike Huckabee called My Favorite Nut Job. Holly is right. Politicians should be fair game, but the obsession with winners and losers runs so deep in the press that it has become the central value of the business. It's not an accident that Trump won the presidency on winning and spent much of his political career calling people losers, from Cher to Richard Belzer to Graydon Carter to Rosie O'Donnell to George Will to Michelle Malkin. Trump sells the vicarious experience of being a winner compared to other schlubs. His lack of empathy is often cited as evidence of narcissistic sociopathy, and maybe it is, but it's a chicken and egg question. Was he always like this? Or did he become more this way because, among other weaknesses, he's addicted to the worst kind of political media? When you look back at the generation of Heather-style coverage, the evolution toward Trump starts to make sense. We can excuse almost anything in America except losing, and we love a freak show. Trump was the best of both worlds. As far as the press was concerned, an Agnew style attacker on the one hand, and a lurid and disgusting monster freak for audiences to look down on the other. There is no better commercial situation for the American media than a president about whom a porn star can write, "I had sex with that." I'd say to myself, "Ick." Leo Tolstoy, in a novella called The Kreutzer Sonata, described a character who visited a P.T. Barnum circus in Paris. The character went into a tent promising a rare water dog and paid a franc to see an ordinary canine wrapped in sealskin. When he came out, the man remembered, Barnum used him to sell more tickets to the crowd. Ask the gentleman if it is not worth seeing. Come in, come in. It only costs a franc. And in my confusion, I did not dare to answer that there was nothing curious to be seen, and it was upon my false shame that the Barnum must have counted. We count on your shame in the same way. We know you know the news we show you is demeaning, disgusting, pointless, and not really intended to inform. But we assume you'll be too embarrassed to admit you spend hours every day poring over content specifically designed to reinforce your point of view. In fact, you'll consume twice as much rather than admit you don't like to be challenged. Like Tolstoy's weak hero, you'll pay to hide your shame. It took a while for news reporters to figure out how to deliver the same superiority vibe you could get from reading local crime blotters or watching bearded lady acts like Fear Factor, Who's Your Daddy, and The Swan. The idea behind most political coverage is to get you to turn on the TV and within minutes have you tisking and saying, "What idiots?" And from there, it's a short hop to, "Fuck those commie-loving tree huggers," or "Fuck the Hitler-loving freaks." We can't get you there unless you follow all the rules. Accept the binary world and pick a side. Embrace the reality of being surrounded by evil stupidity. Feel indignant, righteous, and smart. Hate losers, love winners. Don't challenge yourself. And during the commercials, do some shopping. Congratulations, you're the perfect news consumer.
Boom. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining. It's not over yet. We're going to say a couple concluding remarks. So really quick, I do want to say in the introduction, I did forget to really introduce Anne. I don't always need to, but in this special context, this exegetical reading is for this month's digital literacy and critical media theory course lectures that are co-taught by Ann and myself. So we're really excited to do it. It's this Sunday. If you're interested in the CMT research cohort, or more I guess not the cohort that's currently going is not the cohort that will be going necessarily in the next cycle, but people who join any of these cohorts become a part of the research unit, assuming that they actually do the work. And doing the work does not mean some exam, some bullshit written essay, whatever. It means reading these, it means listening to these, and then rereading these excerpts that we've all pulled in together. We've got plenty more that we're going to pull in over time, but the point is to be thinking with them, with us, and that thinking, as long as you're doing it in a sustained way and actually applying these principles and insights to your actual practice, I expect will help you and us ultimately come up with something new, some kind of freedom in our relationship with not just the mainstream media or alternative media or Hate Inc., but also the devices themselves, our habitual relations to these devices. And I don't know, I kind of want to set you both up to say a couple of concluding remarks as well, both about this book and the CMT research cohort that we are currently in. So I don't know which one of you wants to take it away first here, but
I can go first really quick and just say that, yeah, something that we're trying to do with the CMT, critical media theory and digital literacy cohort and course is to combine philosophy and theory with more popular works or social science works such as this, because I think they need each other. Having the philosophical or theoretical basis makes these works better than just reading them on their own, but then also with something like critical media theory and digital literacy that is so a part of our everyday lives, like our consuming news and media and using our cell phones. We need that practical side and the kind of more easily relatable side along with the theory to actually make concrete changes in our lives. And so Hate Inc., let's see, what did we start with? We started with kind of talking about like smartphones, and what was our first reading?
Marx and McLuhan.
Postman.
But we really kind of begin with the medium as the message and
yeah,
amusing
and
ourselves.
amusing ourselves to death. So we've been working through these various aspects of like media and critical media theory. And so this one, last month, manufacturing consent, and then this month, Hate Inc. being the two more like practical or social science or sociological texts are just important in that whole realm, even in talking about like, oh, our relationship to technology and our relationship with media and social media. It's just another one of those ways to develop our own digital literacy, to have a freer relationship with technology and with the media, with everything that comes with the technology. Like the medium is the message, but then how do we, like, this is kind of more about the content that emerges from the medium and also about the medium itself of the news, but kind of figuring out what's going on with it all today and how to navigate it, to not let it take over our lives, to have that literacy and the understanding of politics and social media and all that. And so this piece, Dave and I read it like a couple years ago, and it's more true than ever. You know, we've got an election cycle coming up next year. The debates are starting, and we can already see some of this playing out, and it's going to be messy, and we're not going to let it like ruin our lives in the same way that poor 16-year-old me was just like wrecked by Trump. So that's what I have to say. The course is great. Check out the books. Like the books in the critical media course, just check them out. I recommend them just to read for your own benefit. Check out Timenergy and Underground Theory. I think those are also both contributions to the field of critical media theory and digital literacy. And I'm looking forward to resuming the course this Sunday.
Yeah, it is going to be nice to reconvene. It seems like it's been a while. I have been thinking in like this critical media theory way since we really dove into it, but I haven't actually like produced anything yet. Like I haven't written anything. And we've done a lot of reading, we've done a lot of thinking, we've done a lot of conversing. And it's great. I feel like um we need the digital literacy to kind of understand our situatedness and where we are and how to understand the world around us. Like both my kids and my like older family members, like parents and shit. Well, like my dad, um, they're both kind of like idiots, like my kids and my dad, like, but they like lean into it. They're like, well, I don't know. I'm just an idiot and everything is bullshit and I don't know what's going on. So I'm just gonna like run with whatever makes me feel good. Um, and that's like not necessarily the position anyone has to take. Like it is all bullshit, but we can also figure out what's going on by paying attention to what's being talked about, and thinking about like how that benefits the people who are talking about it and all that stuff. And I just think like that's important. Everyone should pay more attention to digital literacy so they don't like drink toxic chemicals because they have a sniffle and like shit like that. But then the critical media theory, um, like it's taking that like awareness of the situation and like trying to do something about it and trying to theorize like what does it mean to be a human in this day and age where everything is mediated by devices, everything is mediated by content. Um, and I like that's absolutely the most important thing we should be doing, because we've lost touch with that. We've lost touch with our own being because we've been lost in a sea. Like we've melted. The boundaries have fallen away, and we're all just like this amorphous blob of content consumers. Um, so it's dope. Like I'm excited to get back into the uh discussions, and I'm looking forward to the writings that come out of the cohort and the research unit, the larger research unit. I think it's fucking dope.
One thing I want to say about that amorphous blob thing is also one thing we've been talking about since reading McLuhan and Baudrillard by Godosco is that the medium is the message got inverted by Baudrillard into the mass age is the message. And what he means by mass is the opposite of what Hart and Negri mean when they say multitude. It means that this is not an organizable rabble, but is instead shards. And what makes them shards is that they are refractory from one another into hyper defensive, identitarian, niche consumer categories. And that those, not only are not organizable, but more importantly, our very forms of it, desire and enjoyment vis-a-vis the media that we use and also the news media, whether we consume it or we don't, is all a part of that. And that whether you think we need to control guns, abolish guns, you're anti-war or abortion or choice or whatever, these are all issues that are forever issues. They're never going to go away. We have to be able to have conversations about them. We have to find a way of coexisting on this planet. But we also have genuine class antagonisms that we can develop a better understanding of and then do something with those contradictions to actually hopefully have a way forward into human futures, right? And that Timenergy is supposed to be a crucial piece of that puzzle. And everything we just did with Gores over the last couple of days, I think speaks to that. But with that, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Like, comment, subscribe, get on the forum, get on the app. Let us know if you actually did this. Let us know what your thoughts are. I'm definitely curious to hear back. Okay, take care. Peace.
Woo.